So we're gonna cover chapter number 4, First Revelations. And I love you right here about when you were in your 20s, right off the start in 1957. And you share about an experience with have seen oxens in France. It became an interesting topic to you.
I was reminded a few minutes ago that not everyone these days is as familiar with oxen as I was. So I hope what I'm going to say doesn't sound too strange, but perhaps you've not thought of it in this way before, so hopefully it'll be interesting. I think I was 1957, I think it was much younger. I was still a schoolboy, I remember. One of my very first visits to France, it was one of these exchange visits with a French family, and I stayed at a house in the country. And what I remember most clearly about that was a pair of oxen. Now, if you don't know what oxen are, in the old days before cars, even tractors were invented, and if a farmer didn't have horses, which many didn't, they would often just yoke two cattle together, two male cattle together, and hitch them up to a plough. And this is what you know as oxen. There's something I always found very, very special about them. And I'll just sidestep a little bit now to go back to the Bible. The Bible has many references to oxen, and in particular, there's a very interesting Old Testament verse about oxen. The ox knoweth his master, and the ass, that is the donkey, the ass his master's crib. Now, crib means manger, in other words, where the feed was. The ox knoweth his master, and the ass his master's crib. And then if you jump forward a bit into the New Testament and remember where Jesus was born. He was born in a stable with oxen, and so tradition says a donkey. Now, why should that be, do you think? Why should he choose, of all possibilities, to be born amongst oxen and a donkey? And perhaps it wouldn't sound so strange in India, where cattle are venerated. And indeed, in every town in India, I believe it's still the case, you get cattle wandering around, which has, by the way, a very calming effect if it doesn't cause irritation. I had an old monk friend who used to say what a good thing it would be in the great cities of the world, like London and no doubt New York, if they had a few hundred herds of cattle wandering around the streets. It would calm everybody down, wouldn't it? Be a marvelous way of just bringing a bit of peace and quiet to the place. Anyway, so there's something rather special about cattle. And if you've ever watched cattle, they have a sort of a calmness about them. We talk of contented cattle, don't we? They like to lie down and they like to chew the cud. Well, chewing is a marvelous sort of meditation. And if you watch cattle just chewing the cud, you know, they eat their food first without chewing it, then they have to sort of regurgitate it and then chew it. So they lie there for hours and hours just chewing the cud, like we chew chewing gum, same sort of thing. That sort of calmness about them is, at least for me, a sort of like a step towards what one might call spiritual awareness. I say this in all seriousness. There's something impressive, something quite sort of wonderfully restful, calming about the presence of cattle like that. And when they're used for working, they've got that sort of steady pace, wonderfully measured, steady pace. Great strength, so slow, wonderful rhythm to their movements. calm, patient creatures. Up and down the rows they'll go, pulling a plough or a cart or something. Well, I fell in love with them when I was a schoolboy. And in those days, they were so quite common to see them in Europe. I saw plenty in France, in Spain, and Italy. I remember in Italy, they had a beautiful white breed called Chianinas. And working oxen, usually cattle, are killed at a couple of years old, at least cattle are going for meat. So you never really see how big they get. But a working bullock will live anything up to 20 years. And they grow enormous, huge, great creatures with great, big, massive horns. So to a little boy standing beside them, they were impressive to say the least. Anyway, just the one wondering about, when I was in Australia, of course, I was interested in them. And in those days, there were still one or two big bullock teams of oxen. And I was very lucky to find one where this man had 16 oxen. And 16 of these enormous creatures, all with a wooden yoke across their heads and linked by a chain. And I was absolutely thrilled. He was the nicest of men, and he told me all about how to train them and everything I could. I just loved these creatures and just wanted to learn everything I could about them. And he was so kind. He taught me all I wanted to know. And I remember it was a little clearing in the jungle in the north of Australia, which is really jungle, rainforest up there. And one day we went out into a clearing and I saw them working. And I remembered that as it was yesterday. So I must have been very, very, very wide awake, sort of super awake. And one of the interesting things about spiritual life is that you realize that we are very seldom actually awake. We actually are half asleep most of our time. And if you think of waking up in the morning, you probably go to the toilet and clean your teeth automatically and you're hardly aware of what you're doing. And maybe have a cup of tea or a bit of breakfast. And then maybe you step outside and the cold air sort of wakes you up a little bit more. But then if you're going to work or something, you probably get on a bus and you've done it all before so many times, you're still half asleep, doing it automatically. And then maybe something happens, you wake up a bit more. Or maybe not. Or maybe you spend most of your time really not very interested in what you're doing. Oh, just another day, here we go again. You probably never really wake up at all. Sort of half alive, really. And very occasionally in life, something happens that really, wow, good heavens, wakes you up. And you suddenly, it's like another world, isn't it? You see things. If you have an accident, for example, wow, good heavens, you suddenly go into super reaction. Or sometimes it's just something very gentle, like hearing a bird sing, or an attractive person comes into the room. Suddenly you're all inattentive. Many, many instances. But in this case, it was these oxen in this jungle clearing in Australia that moved me into this sort of state of super awareness. And I use that as an illustration that really spiritual work is all about waking up. So to begin with, long before you start using methods of meditation or anything like that, it's very helpful to attend anything that just wakes you up. A very common thing is sport. A lot of men and women love sport. But not so long ago, I was reading a book and a chap was describing his love of baseball. And he went on for page after page after page describing all the heroes of his boyhood and describing little instances from the various matches, which obviously are deeply embedded in his mind. Because to someone like me, I've never been to a baseball match in my life. I wouldn't know one end of it from the other. Completely disinterested. But to him, it really lit him up, didn't it? Well, for me, it was oxen, or horses also, but particularly oxen. Well, I'm sure most all of you have something that really lights you up. It may just be a video game, for God's sake, or something as, like that, or, looking at That's, you know, somebody, perhaps you're in love with somebody on some film star on the on YouTube or something that thrills you and wakes you up. And how all these things are very, very helpful. First of all, to illustrate how for most of life we are not awake, and just what the contrast is. And you see, any progress in spiritual life, you need to really get the measure between what it isn't and what it is. And that then gives you the motive to move towards the better state, which is the awake state. And to realize the waste of time, how much of life is just spent not awake, not present, not there, living in a sort of semi-hibernation. And once you realize how we're wasting opportunities by simply not being present, then that's a good motive to sit up and take notice of the human situation and try to do something about it. It's the very simple and ordinary things in life that can help us get started on this work.
I love the example of the oxens. For me, it's also always animals.
Yes.
Seeing a dog or a puppy, I feel right away much more present and awake.
Yes.
You talk a lot about what you just talked about, revelation and seeing things as they are, wide awake.
Yes.
But then my question to you is, you also talk about revelations evolve with our levels of consciousness. So then I always wonder, well, how do I evolve my consciousness?
Because I think it's only practice, really. And it comes back to this basic question of what do we want, what we're interested in. How does any skill evolve? The thing about revelation, it comes from the other side. We can't do anything about it ourselves. We can only present ourselves. This evening, I'm looking out the window and it's just a complete blanket of grey cloud, not a break in it. Now, if and when the clouds part, you get a glimpse of sky, don't you? We can't control the clouds in that way, but the clouds part and the sky is revealed. It's nothing to do with us. It's revealed. It may be a lovely blue sky or maybe just a bit of paleness shining through the cloud. It comes in many ways. We can't control it. That's how it is with revelation. You never know what you're going to get. And all we can really do is be ever more present. It's said again in the Bible, there is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed. Truth comes by revelation. It's not, in the higher meaning, we can get knowledge from books, but truth, which is in a higher dimension, it is said is revealed. Well, often these sort of things come entirely unexpected, even when we're least prepared. Suddenly, just you wake up, don't you? If God is present, which we are repeatedly told he is, and if we want to find God, if he is present, then it behoves us to be present also, if you want to find God. Because if we're not present and he is, well, you're not so likely to meet him, are you? Perhaps that's the answer to your question.
You also write about our first windows are usually of the outer world, so our first realizations. And as we practice meditation, being present,
yes.
then is that the transition, that the realizations then move inward?
Probably, I think is the nearest I'll say to that. Because one continues to I keep telling you about just how I spend time looking out of the window. And so often we look out of the window and you've seen it all before. You hardly notice what's now. And then sometimes unexpectedly, something sort of clears in your mind, in your eyes. Extraordinary. And you see with a new clarity. You see a beauty you'd never seen before. When we came out of the church this morning, there were just a couple of us there. And when I'd gone up a couple of hours earlier, there was a full moon last night. And of course, I always love the moon. It's sort of romantic, isn't it? And sort of otherworldly. And it was lovely walking up to the church in dark night, just with a sort of veiled moon. Anyway, when we came out of the church, the whole valley was filled with mist. We could hardly see 100 yards in any direction. Sort of absolute revelation of the magical beauty of mist like that. Quite sort of breathtaking to stood there entranced by this beauty. Stillness, complete stillness. So beautiful. Just makes you cry to stand before something wonderful. I suppose you need to be fairly aware, otherwise you say, oh, it's just a bore, it's just fog, and you won't be able to go to work or something. But to see the world transformed into this miracle of beauty just fills you with humble gratitude beyond words. So that's a sort of revelation. Could come to anyone at any time, couldn't it? I don't know that I'm any more deserving than anybody else. I think I've always been moved by things like that. Of course, if you practice meditation, well, then, of course, you predispose yourself to inner revelation. If you don't meditate, then the inner world is more or less closed to you. You hardly know it exists. Because I've practiced meditation for so long, the inner world's really more familiar to me almost than the outer world. I don't quite know which is which these days.
The aim of meditation is not visions, but union.
Yes.
Anything, and then you continue, anything that can be described as not full union.
That's right. Yes.
Or it presupposes a duality of subject and object. So that's probably why it's not possible to really answer.
Yes. This is very important, particularly to people who are starting off on spiritual life, because countless people come to me all excited because they've had a vision and they've seen either lights or super thing stars or something in their minds, and they think this is a vision of heaven. Oh, maybe it is, but the aim, you mean you can have all the visions you want, you can have your life, spend your life sort of gathering visions if that's what you want. But if you're interested in the deeper aspects of spirituality, you need to pass through the realm of vision. Vision is, all visions are really products of the mind. And you've heard me before speaking about going beyond the mind. The state of union may seem sort of meaningless, really. I never knew what it meant for years and years. People talk about union. What are they talking about? So I'm not surprised if you don't understand what it is. It will dawn gradually as you meditate deeper. I don't know if I can really explain it. You'll have to realize it. It'll be revealed to you, and then it'll be the most obvious thing in the world. But you can't really think your way to it because it's actually beyond the thinking. If I can demonstrate, this is the body, and this is what you call the mind. We imagine is in here, and there's sort of a strata of consciousness between lower and higher mind, and then you go beyond the mind, And the real sort of spirit is beyond the mind. So visions and things are aspects of this. They're in the higher regions of the mind. There's always a beyond. So whatever comes into the mind, however marvelous the vision is, don't be afraid to go beyond it. In fact, there is beyond and beyond and beyond. Even if you have a vision of Jesus or something else marvelous, you can stay there if you like and write books about it, but there's much further to go if you want to go further. Here are the demons and the horrid visions and nasty nightmares and things, and here are the nice ones. And in between there are all sorts of variation. And you could spend a lot of time going up and down between them. But heed what I say, if you want to go further, that's the real freedom, up beyond. Then you can see it all in terms of awakeness, you see. The more awake you are, the world is really asleep, half asleep. Much of our behavior is just robotic, isn't it? We just do this, say the same sort of things, habitual things, think the same habitual thoughts, behave in the same habitual way, not really aware of what we're doing. Walk half asleep, do our daily actions half asleep. Extraordinary, really. The more you see, the more extraordinary it is. You wonder why we live like this. Why more people don't try to get free. Because you realize we live in a sort of prison, a sort of mental prison of sleep. Sort of shut in within this limited consciousness. Only seeing half alive, not even 5% alive, really. Extraordinary. Of course, this is all comes under the general heading of what's called sin, which is falling to a lower state of consciousness from our natural inheritance, which is spirit, which is, of course, 100% awake.
You write, all effort in the world is because one is not here. So
Yes.
Not knowing, one fears, doubts, and looking outwards, not inwards for one's needs. And then you go into this. It's
Yes.
Again, this lack of being present.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Extraordinary, isn't it? I wrote that, God knows how many years ago. All effort in this world is because we're not here. But it's absolutely true, because see, when we're not present, our life gets limited to what's called me, you see. It's this ego again. And then the only strength you've got is this sort of strength, in your muscles. Or maybe you've got a tractor, that makes you stronger, but it's a man-made strength, you see. And the only intelligence you have is this intelligence in here, which is really pretty stupid, isn't it? It's not really very intelligent at all when you consider, the world around you. Man's capacity to make or do or anything, really, it isn't half as wonderful as we tend to think it is. Whereas when you open up to this sort of higher consciousness, you connect with, do you think God is called Almighty God? Most merciful, all-knowing. Well, to begin with, this might just seem pie in the sky to you. It doesn't seem very relevant, because this is our reality, you see. And this is how we think we're going to sort the world out, you see, with these resources. For me, I know what to do. Just like when you may or may not be right, but I tend to think I'm right and you're wrong. But once you rise up into what is really higher consciousness, you begin to realize that this outer world is a sort of outer crystallization. Let me give you the illustration of water. You see, up in the cloud, well, like this morning, that mist is water vapor, isn't it? and sometimes it's visible, but usually in the higher clouds, it's not even visible. But that's where water starts. The vapor, very, very fine vapor is, and then it condenses so you can see it into clouds and that. Then the clouds come down and form rain, and the rain falls to the ground, forms into puddles and ponds and things, and probably it freezes into ice, hard crystalline ice. Now it's all water, isn't it? There it's out vapor, and here it's lumps of ice. It's the same stuff exactly. It's just precipitated and crystallized into solidified form. Well, that's exactly what spirit does. See, spirit is like that subtle vapor in invisible, silent spirit, which then, as you fall in consciousness, it goes through perhaps what you see in visions, first manifestations of things, then it ends up in this, which is really just crystallized spirit. It's the precipitation, you see, from higher consciousness to lower consciousness, from spirit to matter. The same stuff, it's just crystallized. Now then, spiritual work is the reverse process, you see, because this is so limited in everything, in every way, and that is unlimited. So we're moving, when you see, one direction of creation is this, from the unlimited to the limited. And the most limited thing of all is that our life is only 70 or 80 years long, and then we die. It's got a limited time span, hasn't it? And we live within a limited space span. We say we live in this part of the world or that part of the world. But when you're in spirit, you live everywhere. It's universal. You don't have a location in spirit. Spirit is universal like that. And here, I live in just a little flat, 2 little rooms shut up like a mouse in a box. But when I meditate, I just go, I'm free, I'm completely free. I'm not nomad at all. I'm timeless and spaceless. So I'm 1,000,000 times more alive than when I'm living in this little box with a little old man as my reality. So this is the alternative, my dears. Do you want to be like this or like that? Yes, and of course in this world, everything is effort. It's an effort to go down the stairs and do anything. But in this world, there's no effort whatsoever. God does everything. All we have to do is surrender to God, and then we're in the real world. You see, that's what paradise is all about. Effortless. So again, there's a golden rule in all spiritual work. If it takes a lot of effort, it's wrong, my dears, because you're going in the wrong direction. Spiritual work is always a direction from effort to effortlessness. The best meditation is completely effortless. Effortless. Bashing away at a mantra, trying to control your mind. My dears, you're going the wrong way.
John, to touch on that, I understand the concept of effortlessness, but would you say, especially when you start to meditate, there's a certain effort to sit, be still, and start?
To get started, yes. Yeah. To get started.
We want to make sure we get that clear.
Yes, we can't run before we walk. We got to take our first few little steps.
I really love this chapter, and just what you just shared. But just to kind of wrap it up, on the last page in the chapter, you write about this. You write about bodies and mind are not at all necessary to being with a capital B.
Bodies and minds aren't necessary to being. Yes, that's absolutely right. Yes, you wonder what they're for, besides being a prison. Bodies and minds, once you get a taste of freedom, you don't need them at all. But I suppose they serve a worldly purpose. Perhaps I couldn't speak to you unless I had a mind, could I, and a voice to make these sounds. So I suppose they have their place in the great scheme of things. They serve a temporary purpose. Yeah.
It's interesting how, we know this, or at least for me with the intellect, but then there is this attachment to the world, the body, the experience.
Yes, well, this is common to all of us. It's the human condition, isn't it? We do get attached. We love our body, mind, and well, we do because really we don't know any better. That's the answer to that. And it takes a good bit of revelation before we begin to find the higher reality that helps us then to let go more and more. It's always about moving, you see, from something less satisfactory to something more so. We're moving on to something better. It's been described as ants following a trail of sugar, one grain of sugar to the next. And eventually you find the sugar mountain, where it all comes from. But it's a long journey. But we are led on, you see, by a series of wakings up, a series of finding ever more wonderful beauty, ever more satisfaction. Life is something that's instinctively, is better, even though you can't always quite say how or why. What is it that attracts us to situations or people or things? Sometimes we don't really know, do we? We're always just sort of instinctively led that way. What led me to my love of oxen when I was a young man? Why do people love things? How can we explain the leadings of the heart? A lot of things in life are mystery, aren't they? We don't really know. Why is the moonlight so attractive? Something magical, isn't it? I was terribly lost as a young man. I didn't know what to do. I think I was 26. I'd quarreled with my father and left the family business, and I was waiting for a ship to take me to South America, and the ship was delayed, and I was in Paris at the time. I was in love with a French girl, and I went and my parents had a friend in France, in Paris, an old, elderly French woman. I went to see her, and I told her all my troubles, and she said, "You must follow your heart." I'd never heard that before, and my first reaction was, that's selfish, and I'd been very well trained as a young man not to be selfish. So to follow my heart, it seemed something rather selfish. I thought I had to suffer much more, suffer with the suffering of the world. Anyway, and as I grew older, I began to trust this saying more and more, follow your heart. But often we don't know where it's leading us. We really don't, do we? There's some sort of gut instinct that we call the heart. Follow what you love. And God knows where it's leading us. Follow your heart. I've tried to do that all my life. And I give that advice to other younger people these days when they ask me what to do. Follow your heart, my dears. Even if it's just to the girl next door. Or to take the dog for a walk. Maybe it'll lead you to the stars, into the ever beyond, into the great adventure that has no end. Oh, yes. Follow your hearts.